Okay, welcome to CS Office Hours. So excited to have everyone here today. It's December 5th, so we're getting towards the end of the year, 2023. We are still calling this CS Office Hours, but it will be going under a name change soon. Today's topic is post-sales revenue strategies for CS leaders and CSMs. I'm super excited to be discussing this with Anika and getting you all started here. But let me stop sharing for a second. Anika, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Anika Zubair. I am currently the head of customer success at Griffin. Fairly new role for me. I've been there for just over a month. I am based in London, the UK. So I normally don't get to attend these office hours because I think when you guys normally meet, it's about 1 a.m. for me, which is not my brightest or freshest hour. So I'm very excited that there is an exception made to office hours here and there so I can join and have a chat with everyone. Aside from my current role, I've spent the last 12 years in customer success and B2B SaaS, primarily in post-sales roles, and always focused on customer outcomes and driving just the post-sales departments and teams and growing those across the board. A little bit of background, which I think relates back to why we're talking post-sales revenue today, is I actually started in a sales role. So I was an SDR originally, and then moved into account management and then into customer success. So I do come from a sales background, which I know sometimes seems like the enemy when we're in customer success, but I also would really love to make it clear that I have worked in customer success for 13 years and everything we do ties back to revenue. So I really hope that everyone comes with that in mind as we go into today's discussion. And aside from everything I've just said, you can also catch me on LinkedIn, which I already shared. I have the customersuccesspro.com, which is where I share a lot of my thought leadership. And I have a podcast as well, the Customer Success Channel. So some people recognize my voice before they recognize me. But that is a little bit about me. I will also be doing a masterclass starting in January, which I don't know how much I can plug, but it is starting around post-sales revenue for CSM. So if you are interested in something like that, feel free to reach out. But I will stop and we will talk more about the topic at hand today.
And I learned something new because I've been calling you Anika instead of Anika for, I don't know, years.
It's okay. I get both. It's fine.
I get Jane, I get Jan. Anyway.
I can't believe they call
Okay.
you Dawn as a female. Like I can see that for a man, but
If
not for a female.
they just see my name and they call me Jan, and it's just like, all right. So I know. Thank you, Gary. It's Jan. All right. So welcome here today. And usually we start off with like weekly wins, things like that. I got a little flustered because I didn't have, let's see, what was I going to say? Anyway, so I'm a little off today, but it's really great to see everyone. So why don't we just go ahead and dig in since there is so much. Apologies that I didn't start off with more about our weekly wins and that sort of thing. Oh, but collaboration groups. We also, if you notice, over in the chat, we have links to the collaboration groups. What's exciting about this is we've extended the job search cohorts into collaboration groups so that if you're a job seeker, you can meet up in small groups with other job seekers, have sort of an accountability group, that sort of thing. But if you're in your first 6 months of a job, you can have a collaboration group of 4 to 6 people as well. And if you're 6 months plus, then you can also get together with folks. And we're doing this for both CSMs and CS leaders. And I just find that, anytime you have the opportunity to meet with others, connect with others, bounce ideas off, that sort of thing, like it's always sort of a win-win. You don't have to do it alone. So I just want to reinforce that and encourage you to take advantage of that. If you are a job seeker, there's also a mock interview channel. Drop a line there and see if anybody wants to do mock interviews, and you can do a mock interview for them. They can do one for you, all of that, vice versa. So there's lots of resources over in the community, and I hope you do take advantage of them. But As you know, a lot of what we do is just kind of introduce a topic and then send you out to breakout rooms to talk. I know we have a lot of people here today too who will have a lot of things to contribute to this topic of revenue strategies in the post-sales role. So let me go ahead and share this, and please feel free to add your ideas in as we go along, because of course we want to take advantage of all of the expertise as well as the questions that people have. And questions and expertise, they go together. If you don't ask a question, we don't get to, share our ideas. That's how the exchange of ideas happens. All right. Let's see. Last bit of thing is just that, let's see. No, I think I pretty much covered everything, right? And we were recording. So just a reminder on that. Okay, so in post-sales revenue strategies, there's a few key things. And first, maybe what we should just address is that sometimes people think that, or what I've heard, and I don't know if you're of this mindset or not, but sometimes people are concerned that if you enter into a sales conversation of some sort in the post-sales motion, that's going to break that trust, that bond that you have with the customer. And the reason why I want to say emphatically that that's not the case is because you never purchase anything from someone you don't trust. If you don't trust that used car salesman, you will not buy the car. You just won't, right? You have to trust who you're buying from, first of all. There's also some key differences in the pre-sales motion versus post-sales motion. Actually, that gets down to the ending thing about right person, right product, right time. So I'll get to that later. But SaaS, generally a subscription model, the whole point is to land and expand. A customer will not actually break even with the cost that it takes to bring them in and to get them up to speed and onboard and all of that until at least 18 months in. Thus, it's critical in the post-sales motion that you're not only renewing them, but also expanding them. Now, when you expand, that's why, basically the subscription model is land and expand. And CSMs and as strategic advisors really are that expansion part. But it needs to be in service to what the customer needs and the objectives that they're trying to meet, right? If it isn't in service to that, that's when you're like, why are you trying to sell me this stuff? I don't need this stuff. I don't need that Ginzu knife. Get away, stop. You feel accosted. You're like, no, stop this, right? So it's the kinds of things we're going to be talking about and the strategies we're going to be talking about are critical, because you really need to incorporate what you're doing in terms of generating revenue, both for the customer, because when they're using their product, it's either going to save them time or help them make more money in their business. That's why they came to you. That's why they're using your product, right? Or not just helping the customer, but also it helps your own company make, hit their bottom line and make money, right? So, yeah, I'm going to hand over to Anika, which I'm going to keep calling you Anika.
I know. I was waiting. I was like, is Jan going to get it right this time? Because
I know. I have to retrain myself. But
no, I totally agree with Jan saying, by the way. And I think that to set a tone, as I also said, I come from the sales side and I moved into customer success and have been, but every team I've run and every part of the business that I've been at, it's extremely important to tie your role and your outcomes back to your company's revenue or bottom line, like Jan was saying. I think we get really focused on building relationships and making sure that we have that level of trust, which is great. We've spent months or years or however amount of time doing that with a customer, but that also means that the conversations that we are having has to have a direct result to revenue. And I know that that word seems like dirty, but if you think about customer outcomes and revenue, you are that bridging gap between making sure your customers actually get outcomes from your product. And then you almost have to be the translator of how those outcomes tie back to revenue for the business, both as a CSM, but also as a CS leader. And I think that that's something that we are constantly battling and constantly trying to figure out and find that balance and fine line. But as Jan said, I do think that that's something that we have to balance out as CS professionals in general, is making sure that we are tying how our customers are perceiving our outcomes versus how that ties back to NRR. I see questions, Jan. I don't know if we answered them.
No, Randy, come on in.
So I guess two questions on that. And I completely agree with that. One of the things I also have been reading lately about revenue is ensuring that, as a customer, as a CSM, you have to have revenue to show the value for what you bring to the table as well, right? Because I think a lot of times companies tend to, or especially CEOs, they don't see the value of that relationship and what you bring to the table, because obviously once the sale is made, then they have revenue in their pocket, rather than understanding how that relationship building can expand that revenue and grow and keep that customer from a retention purpose. But I also think, and that goes back to kind of that sales aspect, it's kind of that handoff approach that has to be seamless, because if the salesperson kind of maybe fabricates or doesn't do their job from a sales perspective and telling the true value of the service, your job becomes more difficult when it gets handed off to you to kind of do that, because you're kind of having to replicate something that should have been done from the beginning to help that handoff from sales to onboarding to CSMs, to ensure you can have that relationship and that trust, because that trust was built from the start when that salesperson sold that product. That's kind of my,
I would say it's even built from the trust of what's on your website and what's in the when they come in to decide they want a trial or a demo, and then they start speaking to a salesperson, and then they're handed over. But great point, Randy. I totally agree that that is something that is built through different teams within your organization, and it's part of your role to make sure you have that cross collaboration and ensuring that you're able to continue the trust, that you are getting those handover notes, truly understanding what were the use cases they purchased your product for, what are the outcomes, and making sure that that's reiterated in kickoff calls rather than explored from the get-go, because that's almost immediately going to build trust if you already know that information coming into a kickoff call or onboarding, rather than just starting from scratch again. I would say is a great point to add there.
Thank you.
And the other thing too that's really important as whether you're a CS leader or a CSM, is you want to be sure that you're thinking about what sort of model does your business have. And you're like, oh, well, it's SaaS. Well, there's still a lot of different types of models. There's, subscription, but there's also consumption. And sometimes there's even a combination of subscription and consumption. And what do I mean by that? Anybody want to tell me what I mean by subscription model versus consumption model? Okay.
I mean, I will.
Sure, go ahead, Anika. I'm kind of hoping someone else would
people coming on.
I'll take a pass.
Excellent. Take a pass, Percy.
Well, I mean, my own little interpretation, but consumption is, I see consumption is how much a customer is, let's say, utilizing what they've purchased. Subscription is you have let's say a fee for the month. Like, I don't know, I have a Netflix subscription and the fee is always the same. But in a consumption model, that the amount I pay is going to fluctuate based off of my usage rate.
Exactly right. So like in the case of, say, Dropbox or something like that, if you need more storage, then you're going to use more. Or Snowflake is always a great example of consumption model. If you need more, bandwidth, you need more space in the cloud, or, more processing or something like that. But you can also just think about it in terms of Netflix. What if Netflix went to a model where if you watched 5 movies a month, then you would pay X. And if you watch 10 movies, you pay Y. That would be a consumption model. And if you watch 0 movies, you would pay 0. Or if you always pay a little bit of something, then that is subscription plus consumption, right?
Yeah.
Because
And another great example of subscription plus consumption that we use every day is Slack. So we all pay a platform fee for Slack, but when you add a new user, that's an additional consumption fee. And depending on how much consumption you use, Slack actually charges you or doesn't charge you back on how much you consume. So if you have someone who quit your company and that person is gone, they'll actually credit back your account because of the consumption used on Slack, depending on which plan you're on. I know there's lots of
it
plans.
depends on if it's consumption or licenses, but that's a great point. Gosh, I want to call you Anika. I feel like I'm meeting a new person today. So like if you think about Salesforce, right? Salesforce is, was impacted when all of the sales folks were laid off and things like that because there were fewer licenses that were being, right? So a license model, a consumption model, subscription model, all of these things are important because then that also gets into what are you doing with expansion and what sort of opportunities do you have with your customer and how is that, and what kinds of things you might want to follow up with and understand what's happening in their business, and how you might forecast with them in their business so that you understand how you might project what kinds of things you're going to be doing. This also gets back to the metrics session that we had a few weeks back with Erica Villarreal. And if you look over in the resources, I have some of those resources there too. So then Anika, why don't you tell me also about CS Sandwich?
This is such a bad play on a word, but I'm always hungry when I think of creative things. So I always relate something back to food. This has nothing to do with a sandwich at all, but in my mind, I coach a few CSMs and this is how I help them remember a CS sandwich is what I consider how you integrate revenue in every conversation you have with a customer. And it's called a CS sandwich because you need to have the 2 slices of bread and what's in the middle. You cannot have a sandwich without all 3 pieces together. And a CS sandwich in my world is the how, the why, the ROI. And those 3 things connect to make a CS sandwich. It's something that I train on. It's something that I'm actually going to be coaching on in that course that I was talking that I'm going to release in January. But every conversation you're having, whether it's as a leader or a CSM, when you are having a conversation with a customer, you're doing it in 3 parts, which is the how. So how do I use your feature functionality? How do I log in? How do I add a user? How do I turn on this feature or whatever? But you must connect it to a why as well. So why is it so important that I use this feature? Why is it so game changing to my business to make sure I'm using it in this way? And then the third piece is the ROI piece. Is it saving my business time, money, productivity, whatever it is? You're going to want to make sure all those 3 things tie back into the conversation that you're having. A great example that I always use as well is when you get a personal trainer and they're trying to sell you or trying to convince you to work with them. It's like, oh, how are we going to work together? We are actually going to go through this fitness plan and these are going to be our objectives. And then the why is, okay, why are you joining to have a fitness? Oh, I want to lose 10 pounds, or I want to look really great for my wedding that's coming up, or whatever the why is. And then the ROI piece a fitness person would tell you, or a personal trainer is working with me means you'll hit your goal in only 10 weeks instead of 10 months, for example. And so that's a very basic example, but it's always connecting those 3 parts of a CS sandwich in your conversations. And I didn't even have a revenue conversation. If you thought about that, that was me actually helping a customer understand how to use a feature, why it's important to use that feature, and then why it's saving their business time, money, or hours in the day, whatever it is that there is important to them.
Right.
So yeah, I call it a CS sandwich. It makes no sense at all. I should rebrand that. If someone in marketing wants to help me.
Now, if you're a CS leader, some of the things you want to think about then is not just the metrics, but, and let's see, Rod Cherkas had a great post today, which I wish I'd included, but I'll try to find and add later over in the Slack channel. But he had a great post that was talking about, if you're reporting on your NRR as a CS leader, just saying oh, well, we're keeping it flat at 90%, we're achieving 90%, GRR or, or whatever it may be, talk about like, what is the story related to that, right? And that's where you're getting into how many accounts and how much revenue, ARR, it was at play that you're achieving from one quarter to the next to keep even a maintenance of 90%, because that also could be a growing amount of accounts. The other is the CLV to CAC ratio, and that involves knowing your customer acquisition cost, your break-even points, your customer lifetime value. When you're looking at customer lifetime value versus a CAC ratio, that is key for if you're reporting to the board. Your investors want to understand how profitable as a business you are based upon if your customers are sticking around and how much revenue they're producing compared to the cost of bringing them in, the acquisition cost, right? So these are key numbers that you want to think about how you're reporting up to the CEO and to the investors, and how you're working with across your other teams, because the CAC ratio, of course, comes from sales and marketing. So then the understanding your ICP and calling, sharing that back with, ICP, ideal customer profile, sharing that back with marketing and sales means that you'll have a better CLV to CAC ratio overall as well. Another thing just mentioning, as I mentioned a lot, CS is at the intersection between the customer goals and the company goals. When you help the customer achieve their goals, and that involves perhaps making certain that they have the right size of the products and which products they're using to ensure their success, that leads back to your company's success. And then before we get into aligning with revenue, the right person, the right product, the right time. When you think about in the pre-sales motion, in order to sell in the first, customer the first time to get them to sign the dotted line, you if the salesperson isn't talking to the right person, that's okay. They go and they find the right person to talk to. If they're not talking to them about the right product, they can investigate more. They may end up changing and switching out which product they're going to sell and say, oh, okay, well then actually what you need, I think, is this product instead. Not a big deal. They're just exploring, having that conversation. Or if it just turns out it's not a match, it's like, okay, well, thanks, kumbaya, move on your way. Or if it's not the right time, then it's like, okay, so it's not the right time for you to purchase right now. They can just keep that relationship warm and nurture that relationship and come back to them another time. However, in the post-sales motion, if it's not the right person, the right product, right time, think about it. If you don't have the right person, they're like, why are you talking to me about this? Like, do you not understand me? And then they lose trust. Now you have to build that back up, right? You're at a deficit. If you're not talking to them about the right product, again, why are you talking to me about this? That's ridiculous. I don't need that product. You don't even know me. You don't care about me. You've lost trust. Now you have to build that trust back up. Or if it's not the right time, again, why are you talking to me about this? I don't need this right now. Again, you've lost trust. You have to build it back up. So it's critical that you have both the data that you can, in terms of any sort of data that will help you identify which buckets of customer or which customer, or other types of telemetry or relationship building and asking discovery questions, depending upon if you're high touch or low touch, how you're going to gather that information. But it's important that you try and align that to try and get as much information about that to be able to ensure that you're talking to the right person, the right product at the right time, whether you're doing an upsell or a cross-sell.
And I would totally echo Jan on the right person, right time, but also the right questions and almost discovery as well. I think a lot of times,
if it's a high touch,
if it's high, but even if it's not, there's always surveys that can be sent out. There's always in-app messaging in order to get the right answer from your user that's using your product, whether you're high touch or not. I think as a customer success manager, you should be facilitating the conversation to ask the right questions. And it's what sales do. They do discovery calls. They are asking questions and trying to see if you are primed and ready to make a purchase. Now, our job is to educate and onboard and make sure that they're continuing to fully utilize the product. But while we're doing that, we should also be asking the right questions. Are they ready and primed to make a decision? Is that something that's today, tomorrow? It doesn't matter. You're going to be working with them for months or years to come. But asking that question is almost like asking the question that I think we were all fearful before, is like, are you willing to renew if your renewal was up tomorrow? It's almost like that kind of question. You have to be able to ask discovery tough questions to be able to understand what it is your customer is looking to get out of your product. And the last thing I'll say on that is a discovery question, call, whatever you want to call it, survey should not just be a one and done. Like, I think we take the idea from sales that, okay, they have a discovery call and then now they know who their executive buyer is and who they have to pitch to, etc. But in CS, as you know, it's always ever evolving, which means that your customer and the way they use your product is going to evolve quarter to quarter, year on year, but also their business is going to evolve massively. Look how businesses have shifted this year. So that means if you haven't had a discovery call with your customers this year asking, what is it you're looking to hope to get out of our product? But more importantly, what is your business looking to have happen in 2024? That's a question I would hope every CSM is asking, because you really need to understand what their goals are. And you can't just expect the same goals from a kickoff call to be the same a year, 2 years later, or even 2 quarters later, if I'm honest.
Right. Randy, what did you want to share?
Yeah, just going to say, I mean, as a byproduct of that, of facilitating everything we just talked about, if you get a customer that obviously wants to renew and is happy with the service, hopefully they can be kind of advocate of your product, and then you can ultimately have them kind of help you even sell your product by using it as a somebody that another client could technically call as a as somebody, as an unbiased person to kind of give you another leg up, if you wish, in trying to facilitate the value of your product, why it can provide value to them. And so that kind of is an indirect revenue opportunity that ultimately you could help in selling your product just from the byproduct of all the aspects that we just you just outlined here.
Right. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, Randy, because I also saw over in the chat somebody talking about tracking CS qualified leads and CS qualified advocates. So I just added that on the slides here because that's exactly right. If in the post-sales motion, if your CSMs are actually going through and negotiating that sort of thing, first of all, be sure that they have the training and the support to do those negotiations. They also have the time to be able to do that. Sometimes if you have procurement, things like that, they can get pretty lengthy. But if they're not, if either it's going to a renewals manager or account manager, or maybe it's in your organization going back over to sales to do any of the contract conversations, then you want to be sure that you're tracking CS qualified leads that are, and tracking too how successful they are. What are the quality of those leads, and what is the success of those leads, and how are you compensating people who are contributing to the sale of that, right? That's one thing you want to be thinking about as a leader. But what Randy was just talking about too is CS qualified advocates. When you're building advocates, when they are successful in using your product and they become advocates, that helps you in a number of ways. It not only helps, oh, we've got more people for our webinars and our case studies or for sales referrals, fine. But also if they are bringing in customers, there's literally on an average 5x. If 5x is the cost for a customer acquisition cost, and 1x is what it costs to maintain the customer, when you go through and look at the incremental cost for, say, renewals, or getting, and it continues to go down to the point when a CS qualified advocate, if they are bringing in and suggesting other people, the cost of that is literally, incremental cost is 0.1x. Actually, Percy, you may have been doing some of the research on this, right? I think that you were pulling some of this together. Anyway, so there's literally a 50 times difference between the customer acquisition cost versus the cost of bringing in a new customer from an advocate.
Yeah, and I think furthermore, 80%, roughly 80% of revenue and sales come from your existing customer base, not new sales. And so that reinforces the importance of the CSM role done right. It will nurture that account, that relationship, and whether the CSM is going to be responsible for the retention rate or just responsible for the relationship and, bringing in the salesperson to, extend sales or, have expansion sales. The vast majority of your sales are going to come from that existing relationship. So it's massively important, the role that we're talking about here with the CSM.
And that's another thing too that CS leaders should take a look at is of the cohorts that you have of your customers, how much revenue are they responsible for? It's helpful to understand the health and quality of the customer lifetime value, going back to looking at the ratio and that sort of thing. But also, I've been in organizations and consulted at organizations where 97% of the bottom line was the responsibility of the post-sales organization because it was existing customers that were literally responsible for 97% of the bottom line. And yet still the CEO was focused on sales and bringing in new customers. And yet it was his whole organization was going to fail if he didn't start to look at the post-sales motion and how to support that. And as a CS leader, it is absolutely your responsibility to do that analysis and look at those numbers to bring that to light so that you can help both your customers and your company succeed. Anika, what do you want to say as we start to go out to breakout sessions?
And I think the only other thing to add is that a lot of the things Jan just highlighted from lifetime value and all the revenue metrics that are super key, which if you're at a startup or just getting started with accounting for revenue, there are direct revenue indicators and indirect revenue indicators. And if you just start tracking that, that is a perfect place to start because you need to be very comfortable with the lingo of saying what my team, the tasks and things that my team are doing day to day result in 10 million ARR or result in 110% NRR, but you need to start to list those out. Eventually, yes, there are amazing models where you can have metrics and CAC to LTV, ratios, which are brilliant if you're at that stage. But I would also say if you are in an organization that does not currently track how CS ties back to revenue, my first tip would be whether you're a CSM or a CS leader, what are your actions or tasks that you do that directly impact a renewal or directly impact an upsell or directly impact or indirectly, like advocacy. Indirectly is a CSQL. Those are all things that you're doing directly or indirectly. And then once you have that list, you can then start to go to your CEO or your board and truly outline, hey, this is how my team ties back to revenue because we hold this part of the revenue conversation. But yeah, that's just for anyone who's starting off with shifting to revenue.
And that gets to the last point here as we're going out to breakout sessions is that, take a look at your daily tasks and how they align with your business objectives. Are you doing work that moves the needle? And that can be indirect or direct, right? But take a look at what is actually contributing to your customer's success in meeting their business objectives and how then that also is leading to your own company's business objectives. And that's where you want to try to spend your time. So it's always a good idea to sort of do an assessment and say, how am I spending my time? Am I doing support tickets? That's interesting because we have a support team. Why am I doing support tickets? How's that moving the needle? Things like that. The questions that we want to send out, and just a reminder for the lightning round of intros, just your name, current or most recent role in company, your status if you're a job seeker, first 6 months or 6 months plus. Then we want to look at how do you and your team bridge between outcomes for your company versus outcomes for your customer, and how can you proactively tie CS metrics to revenue? And if you're a job seeker, how do you tie your CS metrics to revenue and business growth and outcomes, especially in that resume and your story as you go out there and you're talking. And just remember, we do have lots of other resources for you to dig into. All right, so did everyone get the notes? Did you get a link to the notes so you can keep these notes? As
Yes.
well as we'll
Could somebody
you-
post it one more time? I think I missed
one
it 'cause
more
I came in
time,
late.
Jay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think I just saw that Jay posted it, but just post it one more time again. And then
Oh no, I got
will-
it now.
You got
I
it?
got it now.
Okay,
Yep,
great.
thanks.
And now I'm gonna set up some breakout groups. And we're gonna go away for 18 minutes. Sorry. There's so much to cover and we still didn't cover it all. So I just really encourage everyone to sort of, continue the conversation in Slack, one-on-one, in your collaboration groups, dig into the topics and all of that. And off we go to breakout groups. So,
Wait.
what kinds of things came up? We tried to cover as much as we possibly could before sending you out, but there's still so much more. Was there something in particular that resonated or that came up in your conversation that hadn't been discussed already, or a way that you've applied it?
Percy had a good example of how he's applied it.
Oh, well then let's hear. Where is that?
He's here.
Yeah. Hi.
Oh, there we go. Percy.
Hey, I just talked to them about outcome framework that we use. We don't like to just leave it up to the CSMs to have a generic conversation about outcomes with customers, because then 150 CSMs, you're gonna kind of come up with 150 different variations of ways to do it. So we develop a framework, and then we have CSMs essentially use that standard framework when talking to customers. So then we develop a very clear profile of these particular personas care mostly about outcomes X, Y, and Z. Those personas care about those particular outcomes. And so I just shared what that framework looks like with the team, and happy to talk to anybody about it if they want to reach out offline.
Yeah, especially when you have a team of 150 CSMs, right? Give some guidance, give them an idea of where to start. And certainly there could be that they discover that there's, they have a customer that doesn't fit that mold exactly, but it gives them a place to start and sort of kick the tires and say, is this, valuable to you? And learn and help them even more. Absolutely. And that gets into sort of that enablement and that training that you're giving your team when you're a CS leader. That's a great example, Percy. Kimberly?
Yeah, we kind of got into a talk at the end, and I like the way Christine Kukic framed it. She said, when are you maybe actually doing a disservice to your customers by being helpful? Because I was talking, and a few of us were talking about, like for instance, in my current role, which is in higher ed, like there's a lot of pressure to have our calendars open and available for students, almost like all day, every day, right? But that comes as at a cost, because if it's kind of like the support thing. Like if you're constantly making sure that each individual person who reaches out to you is well served, you're missing all of those people who aren't contacting you that you need to be digging into the data and reaching out to. So I guess just a reminder that like boundary setting,
Proactive.
managing up is really important, especially as an IC.
And thinking about how to be proactive, because if all you do is wait for people to contact you, then what about all the people who aren't contacting you? How are you being proactive with your book of business if you're CSM, right? And thinking about who actually needs your help. There was a post recently that Greg Danes did about red, yellow, green, and how so often people focus their attention on these red accounts, and or maybe they'll help the green accounts. And then there's all the middle ground, the yellow. So he was advocating for just getting rid of the yellow. What I advocated for is have a playbook. Like, what are you doing to help that yellow group become successful? In what ways, what buckets do they need to become successful? There's probably different ways that they each need some way of helping to become successful, so that you can then go and upsell and cross-sell and all of that. Any other things come up? Yeah, Laura.
I think one thing that John raised was the sales team often leans into what is the procurement or purchasing process and who needs to be involved, but maybe that doesn't trickle down to other levels like success. And so if you are, whether you're in charge of that commercial renewal or not, like you still need to know who needs to be involved because it became your problem the moment that they decided to sign up, right? You need to know who are all those different layers of multi-threading, who are all those different decision makers, because if you're not talking to any of them and you just kind of go, okay, sales, it's your turn now to renew, like you haven't helped yourself out at all. So I just appreciated that like high level of procurement, some process, sales learned it, we got to learn it too, so we know what to do to continue it.
Yep. And multi-threading, making certain that the relationships that were built during the sales process are continued and developed even further in the post-sales motion, right? Because eventually those are the same people you'll need to talk to about renewals and expansion. Absolutely. Any other things we got 1 minute left. Anything to say to send us off with? Yes, Kat.
I think if I had a magic wand of my CS like tech stack, it would be that a vendor will finally nail contact management for the, discovery, pre-sale, post-sale, influencer sort of like riddle, because I think I yearn for all of that data and I want my CSMs to have all that data. And I think contact management gets so trashed so quick.
Interesting. And so that would be a great thing to sort of crowdsource and think about what kinds of things would be useful in that kind of contact data. And is there some way that with the CRMs or any of the platforms that you have, or if you're using spreadsheets, how can you indicate that in a way that's consistent across accounts so that then you can pull that up in a meaningful way, so that then you can say, oh, this is who I should be contacting, or I don't have that type of contact for this account, right? And that sort of thing. And then as a leader too, you can take a look at how each account is multi-threaded and if it is weak or if it's strong in terms of being multi-threaded. Yeah, that's great. Okay, we're at the hour, so I totally understand if you have to jump. I unfortunately have to jump too, but I loved this time with you all today, and I hope it was useful. Please, yes, go back to any of the notes that are over in the Slack channel, continue the conversation in the community, and join a collaboration group if you want to continue these conversations in small groups throughout the week, okay? Really enjoyed seeing you all. Thank you, Anika, for joining us today.
Thanks, Jan.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Jan, Anika.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of SuccessHour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.